He's an electrician from Navan who's a founder of People for Economic Justice and leader of Direct Democracy Ireland, a new political service that's going to be launched in Buswell's Hotel in Dublin on Wednesday next. I'm delighted to welcome Ben Gilroy to the Late Lunch. Ben, thanks very much for dropping in today.
No bother, how are you?
I'm very well, and it's appropriate you're here. I actually didn't realise when we set this up that this launch was next week, but I'm more delighted that you're with us this afternoon. Ben, I suppose, first off, you've had a lot of profile in the media in the last while especially. But would you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background? Have you been involved in political activism ever in your life before this?
No, I had no real interest in politics at all, to be honest with you. I grew up in Charlie Haughey country down in Dublin, so I think that was probably what put me off politics for life, I thought. And I had never really any interest in politics because I always just felt they promised you one thing, delivered totally the opposite, and it just went on that in a cycle, and I just stopped. It just became a nonsense for me.
So you have no affiliations with any of the parties that are with us since the formation of the state, to make that clear?
Not one.
Not one. That's good anyway. I noticed you call the new party, we can call it, Direct Democracy Ireland, a political service rather than a party or a movement. Is that on purpose?
It is on purpose, yeah, because I don't believe anybody feels they have been serviced by any political party, because they're supposed to be like a service, meaning like a servant of yours, and when you see them putting the interests of the banking elite and the corrupt banking elite, I might add, around the world, second to the wants of people in this country. I mean, like the suicides now are up to 2 a week. We've 1 in 4 children going to bed hungry at night. And they certainly couldn't call themselves a political service. So that's why we decided to call it a political service rather than a party.
Now, prior to the last election, if I just take you back then, we had people like Eamon Dunphy and other notables on national television telling us there's a gap in the market. There needs to be a party. And of course they said the time was too short. But I have kept a track on this since, and there hasn't been a peep out of them since the election. Yeah. Are you the people now that are offering this?
Well, I'd like to think so. I don't see anybody else offering it. I mean, you talk about the last election. I have Michael Noonan and Enda Kenny in court for what they're doing with the sovereign money of this state. It's a court case where we went up and marched to the Dáil with over 300 people and delivered the summons to them. Because they promised one thing, and I know people will say, well, sure, politicians always lie to you. Well, of course they do, but we can't keep accepting that as the norm, and especially now when this is the most taxing debt they've ever put on the state. I'm not going to sit back and just say, well, sure, they always lie to you, so what? Like, I don't care for myself too much, but for my young children, and maybe my children's children, I'm not having this debt around their neck in this lovely state of ours.
So the debt, let's step back a bit. Yeah. So 2008 was the time, and Brian Lenihan was faced with the night of the long knives, as you like to call it, where he had to make a decision. The banks rushed in, they met him, there was consultations with Europe, and next the banks were bailed out. Is that where the problem... Now, of course, the problems were building up to that point, but was that the seminal moment?
I tell you, it wasn't really the moment for me. I mean, that was the crux of the problem, really. And it even went before that. Since then, before I ever thought of getting into any of this, I have met with top grade bankers who obviously come to me, and we call them whistleblowers. And I had a banker come to me. He was from Germany. And he came to me and he told me that in 2007 he was making serious reports to the financial regulator who didn't do anything. Now, I think that guy Neary should have been in jail for treason. And yet in Ireland, we give him a 600,000 bonus. Now, Jerry, I come from the real world. And if I'm doing a job and somebody wants something done and I don't do it and I made a complete mess of it, what do you think the chance of my getting a bonus?
No, I know exactly what you'd get. But Ben, you're saying that the warning signs were raised by different people at different times. So the regulator didn't do his job. Yeah. The government. What about the Fianna Fáil government that was in power at the time?
Well, they were a disaster. And you see, because they're all in the pockets of each other between top businessmen and developers and bankers, and they're all in that little club, they all have a promise to help each other out. And that's why I feel that we do not have a political service for the people in this country.
Is this government different? The Fine Gael Labour coalition?
No, they're worse, and I'll tell you why they're worse. And that's the reason I have them in court. Because at the time, we all knew Fianna Fáil should not have done what they done. And the reason there wasn't probably rioting on our streets at the time like there was in Greece is that we had an opposition party all singing the correct tune. Oh, when we get in, Varadkar said, not 1 cent more will we pay back. No more repossessions on my watch, Enda Kenny said. So they were singing the right tune. And when they get in, they not only do they continue paying back this fraudulent debt that was put on our country, but they tax now basic human rights. It's a basic human right to have a home. They're taxing it. It's a basic human right to have water. They're taxing it. And then,
they tax it everywhere else in Europe. This is what they tell you.
Yeah, they may do, but the reason is these taxes are coming in is not because they tax it all over Europe. I mean, the ECB and the IMF and the unholy trike, or the Trinity as I call them, is basically they're dictating what happens in Europe. You know, they're telling us, a sovereign state, what we're to tax and how we're to tax it.
But aren't we in a hole, Ben? This is what you're hearing all the time. This is the spin that you get. We're in a hole. That night when the guarantee happened, you know, the bank debt became a sovereign debt at that stage. Right, the handcuffs were on. A lot of people feel at that stage then. We've no choice now. We're locked into this. If that didn't happen, let me talk to you about that night. If that guarantee did not happen on that night, do you ever envisage what might have happened? A run on the banks? Maybe break down in terms of law and order in this country as people try to get access to the money. Do you not see that that could have been a possibility?
Yeah, it could have. But now the people have no money. There was a run on their money as is and it's gone. I mean, that's the fact that most people in the country now have no money. I should have called out the statistics there to you. And in this county here alone, here in Louth and Meath, the amount of people I meet with receivers in on farms, receivers in on businesses, and it's the length and breadth of the country. I mean, I travel from Donegal to Cork to try to help people in courts and stuff like that. And, you know, the suicide rate, man not too far from here hung himself that I knew. It's all over the place. So we're not really the riotous type of people. I've seen in Greece they're wearing T-shirts, we're not the Irish. And, you know, and I thought, you know, we probably deserve that a little bit because, you know...
So we're a quiet people, you're saying? We haven't...
We are, but we're clever. We'll go around the clever way. I mean, we're well-educated people. And if someone's doing wrong with us, we'll bring them into court and we'll get it done properly.
Let's go back. We have no money. There's a big hole. The banks have to be guaranteed according to everybody in Europe as well, because this is what our European master said, right?
Yeah.
It has to be guaranteed and we need a bailout. Do you deny that we're in such a hole, we had to go somewhere for the money? Had we not gone to the trike, as you call it, what would we have done? Where do you see we'd have got the money to keep the show on the road, Ireland Inc.?
Yeah, well, you see, the problem there is that's what they're telling you. I mean, we had an advisory group come over in 2008 to advise Ireland on the best way out, and the advice was pay back the bondholders. Now, we released a document on Vincent Browne through Claire Daly, and it was the list of the bondholders. And you see, the reason the government at the time were telling you they didn't know who the bondholders were, now can you imagine? I mean, I hate being treated as being stupid, but imagine telling us they didn't know who the bondholders were and yet they're paying them. Right? And the reason they didn't want you to know is that most of the bondholders, or the bondholder banks that were paid out here, were all part of this group that came over to advise in the first place. So
the advisors were telling us, you're saying, to repay them?
Yes, of course.
So there was no independence as such there?
Not at all.
But I come back to the point. We have no money. We're broke in the country. How do we survive without a bailout?
Well, I didn't get a bailout. Did you get a bailout,
no,
Jerry? Because you're telling me
not.
something.
No, I didn't. And I suppose the most of the people listening to us today didn't. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, the banks got a bailout. I mean, the banks are just a corporation and they got bailed out. I think we should have kept one bank going. Maybe Bank of Ireland or maybe AIB as well. I don't know. But I mean, Anglo-Irish Bank was one of the most corrupt banks in Europe. I mean, one of the most toxic banks in Europe. And we've decided to put all our sovereign money and our inheritance of our children and children's children to prop up criminal activity in these banks. There were serious liquidity laws in these banks that were broken that carries 5 years in jail. How many have gone to jail for this?
So are you a supporter of Sean Quinn and his family? Do you think they might have been sold a pup?
Pup for fleas. I am a supporter of Sean Quinn and his family. Now, however, and I'll tell you the reason why, I don't know the ins and outs of Sean Quinn's dealing. And I think he'll admit himself he probably wasn't cleaner than snow. But the problem is, I'm a big fan of due process. Sean Quinn has not been found guilty of anything in the courts, right? And yet we have receivers in lifting assets belonging to him. Now, he said he was trying to hide the assets because one of the most corrupt banks in Europe was trying to take everything from him. He said, let me have a court case first, and then I'll give up assets if that's what the court decides. And I think that's due process. But of course, they won't do that, and they're coming the other way around it. They get receivers in, and all the receiver has to do is prove that he's lawfully appointed. And then he takes everything. And it's what the banks are doing all over the country with farms, businesses and everything. And that's why I'm a fan of due process. And Sean Quinn just happens to be in that as well. And, we mustn't let our Irish begrudging blood come out, because it's in all our veins, unfortunately. And just because he's a very wealthy man with a lot of assets, I'm in the same boat. I just have my home. But it's the only asset I have. And I'll do anything to protect my asset. And I mean, we're all in the same boat, so I can't throw stones at him and being then, doing the same thing myself. And that's the problem.
Now, we're going to talk about where we mentioned there about the regulator, also about the banks, but I want to about the government, but I want to come to the banks in a moment. We're just going to take a wee break for news and weather at 2:00. And if you'd like to comment to us, the text number today is 53958 by text. It'll cost you 20 cents thanks to eMobile, Eircom's mobile phone service. You can call into us now, 1850 715 958, or leave a comment on our Late Lunch Facebook page. You're with the Late Lunch on LMFM Radio, and Ben Gilroy, the leader of Direct Democracy Ireland, who are launching next Wednesday in Buswell's Hotel in Dublin, is our special guest on Late Lunch this afternoon. A question about the bankers' pensions from a listener who's just called in and says, Jim in Navan has been on to ask you, put it to you, what's your view on the pensions, the massive pensions, these bankers who led this country down the road to ruin?
I don't think they're getting enough, Jerry. I think we should give them more.
I presume that's tongue-in-cheek from Ben Gilroy.
Because, you see, I think we should give them more, because people then might wake up. Because, we have Richie Boucher. I remember when the banks were getting bailed out, they said no one in the banking circle was to get paid more than 10,000 a week. Now imagine even 10,000 a week, Jerry. I know your wage is probably close to it, but to me,
are you listening, Michael?
To me, it's a different world. And now we've Richie Boucher paying himself 16,000 a week. What can you do against that? And then you have the Anglo boys, the little golden circle of Anglo. There are 6 of them now in IRBC, getting over 500,000.
Do these boys play in the Premier League in England? They're star footballers. They must be.
They must be, yeah.
What else could they be at that? Yeah. That is obscene.
Well, it's obscene. Let's pretend that they were very good bankers. It's still obscene. Now, these came from Anglo, the corrupt bank, one of the most corrupt banks in Europe. Now how more obscene is it? While people can't afford... Like, I met one woman, and only that she had 2 packets of sausages in her fridge on a particular week, she said she wouldn't have been able to pay the mortgage. So she fed her family on 2 packets of sausages. She said she did little saucy sandwiches, a friend are going to school and stuff like that, and that's how she's survived that week. That's an honourable person trying that hard to pay her mortgage.
Is it down to that?
It is down to that, and in huge, huge numbers too.
Another question from a listener as well. They rang to say they heard you talking about the regulator, and they're just giving an example. Gas prices was a recommended 5% hike. They're saying the regulator decided it'd be 8.5%. So this lady wants to know, Ben, who's regulating the regulators?
Well, that's the problem in the country. There's nobody ever regulating the regulator. I mean, as I was telling you about this German banker that came in, and when he reported to the regulator, now just to give you an idea what happened in this particular case, this guy had come from Germany, where they're used to dotting the I and crossing the T. And when he came over, he had read in the New York Times, because he was telling his comrades over there that he's going over to Dublin to do banking, and he was shown a column in the New York Times to say that Dublin was the Wild West of banking. And when he came over here, he could not believe it, because they were allowed a 3% deviation on the liquidity law. It doesn't sound much, but when you're dealing billions, it's a lot of money. And he said regularly it'd go to 10% and 15%. And this guy had a breakdown and went to St. John of God's, because there's 5 years in prison for this, right? But he would report it to his boss, who now sits on the board of the central bank, by the way. And his boss would say to him, put it down as a system error. Oh, put it down as a system error. This is what he was getting back. So eventually one day he got an IT crowd, because he knew he was going to the regulator with a barrister to report it. And when he went to the regulator to report it, he had an English IT company, well respected, phone into his systems to back him up, because he didn't trust anyone in Ireland within the circles. And the IT crowd took a couple of hours, and they came back to him and said, your deviation is now up at 40%. And I said to him, well, what does that mean in real terms? And he said that meant that we were trading 5 billion a day that we didn't have. Now, that was a UniCredit bank, the 5th largest in Europe at the IFSC. 5 billion a day. Now, on this TV show that went out in Australia, he's on it, explaining this, what happened in Ireland. Nick Gleeson is on it as well. And Nick Gleeson at the time was saying that he was a rogue trader. He admits he was a rogue trader. But he said he was only doing like 800 million over a 2-year period that brought Barings Bank down. This guy was trading 5 billion a day. And he said all the banks were at it in the IFSC.
Legally.
Well, illegally, but I mean...
Yeah, but, you know, without parameters.
Well, there's 5 years in jail, and you're talking about the Quinn family. The Quinn family, Mr. Quinn, sitting in jail tonight, you know?
I've always suspected, and I say this as a personal held opinion, that it's not all one way with the Quinns, and that's my belief, and I think that will come out at the end of the day, and I hope it does. Other comments? Ben, only for you, there are people in this country who would not be alive today. Thanks indeed for that comment there to you. And somebody else asking, would you ask Ben Jerry to explain securitisation?
Okay, well, securitisation creates the bubble mess that we're now feeling the effects of when the bubble bursts. So what securitisation is basically just a very fancy word of saying selling. So what they do is they sell your mortgage on to investors, pension funds, stuff like that on the stock exchange. But the way they do it is they would gather up maybe 2,000, 2,500 mortgages, and they put it into what's called a special purpose vehicle. They have all these fancy words because you're never supposed to understand any of this, Jerry. And it goes into a special purpose vehicle, which is a box, and it's basically floated on the stock exchange, and the bank get paid. Now, the banks often, they go to court then, and you'll see they pretend to be what's called the party in standing, or the injured party. But only in banking can you sell something and still own it. And this is because you cannot find the legal owner of these mortgages. And you'll see in America, there's a lot of cases starting to win now on this, because they've actually proved that the bank, you sold that mortgage, you've got paid for it, you're not the legal person.
So you're saying the bank actually doesn't hold the debt that they've given to you, they've sold that on to somebody else?
Of course they have, yeah, sure. You seen Bank of Ireland just before Christmas last year said they're selling on the loan book, and they raised 5 billion.
So in other words, most of the mortgages that are being pursued in this country are no longer owned by the bank concern that you believe you've borrowed from.
Oh, of course they're not.
So
I have the documents to prove it.
Is that not a flaw in the system that can be exploited?
It's a fraud in the system that can be exploited. Absolutely, it's fraud, because you cannot bring yourself before the High Court in this land and claim to be an injured party when you're not. You have to go in and tell the truth. Now, I have documents from all the banks showing billions upon billions of euro worth of these mortgages sold on. And they go to court every day and they say, oh yeah, we securitise mortgage, we didn't just securitise your one. And in every court case I'm in, they didn't securitise your one. And then you get these affidavits from the bank. Now, you know, even the Master of the High Court himself said there's only a nodding and a wink of truth to these affidavits. And twice last week in the High Court, I won 2 cases on what's known as subject matter jurisdiction, because the bank couldn't produce a competent witness. So...
And where does that end? You mean you won the cases? What does that mean? I'm trying to rationalise this myself. I borrowed 250,000 for a mortgage from the bank. Mm-hmm. I can't pay it now. Right. They chase me. I'm in court. This case, if this is sort of what you were with, what happens then when you win the case? What happens that debt?
Look, at what I would always say. Then that's a good time to do a deal with the bank, isn't it? I mean, they can still come and pursue you again. But you must remember, Jerry, one of the pillars of contract is called the meeting of the minds, right? So when I met the agent of a bank saying he's giving me a loan for 250,000, he's looking at Ben Gilroy and he's saying he's a good, big, healthy man. He's able to work. I don't think he'll, go to Australia for 6 months and give the fingers to the bank. He'll maybe even work on Saturdays. He looks that type of lad, and he'll try his best to pay back the loan. And that's what I've done. But on the other foot, Jerry, as I looked at the bank, I would say in the meeting of the minds that I'd be looking at the bank and saying, well, this is a bank. They won't act fraudulently. They won't sell my mortgage on to someone else and pretend they still own it. They won't recklessly disobey liquidity laws that could get us in serious trouble. And at no time will they go to the government during the night and look for a bailout. Now, who broke the contract first? Where's the breach of contract? And you see, Jerry, like when I also looked at the bank, I'd said, well, they'll keep the money supply going in the country, because you or I can't do that, Jerry. Now, if they've turned off that money supply, how are we supposed to pay back? With what? I mean, I don't think they're taking Green Shield stamps right now.
So obviously you came to this from your own circumstances, getting back to what I asked you earlier on. Mm-hmm. You have a mortgage you owe, and you're in a situation where you had to try and deal with this. Did they come after you?
Well, they haven't yet, but I mean, I tell people, educate yourselves on these matters and you'll soon find out what I'm saying is right. Like, Google securitisation. Look in the American courts. Look in the South African courts that won recently. Because this man in South Africa had basically, and it's all the bar system, so it's the same legal system, right? And the man was just about to lose his home, and he stood up in court and said, right, I have a cheque here for the legal owner of the mortgage. Whoever can come in with the legal ownership now, I'll pay it. And of course, with that, you could hear a pin drop and everybody pulled back and nothing could be done. Because you can't find the owner of a securitisation. See, if you have 2,500 mortgages that go in and are sold, you buy 3% and I buy 4%, and next week I'll get rid of 2%, and it's all derivatives and nonsense that bankers come up with. Now also, they have insurance for bad debt. When does that kick in? Or do they have insurance?
So are you saying that the banks and the financial institutions at this time are trying to put up the biggest try-on with customers that's ever been?
This is the biggest scam from an institution, and we have many institutions that were corrupt in this country, from banking to church to you name it, and this is one of the biggest money grab, asset grabs from a scam going. Because
is it true to say, if you're out there and trying to think about this, that back to that night when the debts were guaranteed, the banks were bailed out, whatever, we have put the money into these banks. So is this a double whammy? They've got the money already and they're coming after it again. Is that fair to say?
It is, Jerry. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was to get your money and now take the asset. I mean, you actually think, Jerry, that this is a bank that came to us, the Irish people, for a bailout. And the very few people that now can't continue on while their taxes still bail these people out, they're evicting. We should have showed them the same sympathy they show us. And I sat down with a number of bankers, and I'm not anti-bank. I know that sounds a funny thing to say. We need banks, but we need honest banks. We don't need rogue banks.
I borrowed, or you or whoever borrowed the money. I borrowed the 250,000. I borrowed it, Ben, yes, and I signed the documentation and everything. I owe it.
Yeah.
Even though you're saying to me,
absolutely,
who is the legal holder of that debt in this point in time? Is that just not a moral thing as well to say?
Absolutely, yeah. And look, that's the biggest weapon they have. I mean, like, during the good times, let's call it that, Jerry, when there was money in circulation, like, morally, I was paying it back. I didn't miss one payment in 3.5 years. So did we all become immoral overnight? I mean, of course we didn't. The point is, they have set it up this way that we cannot pay it back. Like, so we can't do it. What do they want? I think what we should have done was, when we bailed out, I think the total cost of this bailout is going to cost about 140 billion. Okay, now I know it started off at 3 and then it's up to 75 for the banks and 75 for the bondholders. There's your 150 roughly. And the total mortgage debt, credit card debt and car loan debt in this country at the time was 147 billion. Now what if we said, right, there you go, there's your money, your refinance, but we're clearing all the debts as well. Or at least, give us some sort of something for our money. The country would be thriving right now. You could imagine if people only had, say, maybe half of their mortgage to pay, or half of their credit card, or half of their loan. We could have been thriving right now. But instead, for some reason, we spent all this money and got nothing for it. And it's the same with the assets in our country. Our oil, our gas, our fishing. How much did we get for any of that? Does anybody know? Because the government are trustees of the state. We're the beneficiaries. And hands up everybody that feels like a beneficiary.
I'd say there's very few hands going up. Ben, will you stay with us a few minutes?
Sure.
Just want to take a quick break and come back in a few moments' time.
Sure.
Ben Gilroy, the leader of Direct Democracy Ireland, is with us on Late Lunch this afternoon. Ben, just a couple of comments about an article in the newspaper today where there is some form of debt write-down that you won't be allowed now keep a car that's over €1,200 in value or jewellery beyond €400. Will they be pulling me gold teeth next, Ben?
That's exactly what they'll be looking for. I mean, they'll be digging up your dead granny to see if she's acting on her finger.
It's from the ridiculous to the sublime. Let me read some. There's lots of comments coming to us. I'll get to a couple of them anyway. This government, Jerry, doesn't have a clue how to govern. After the house charge debacle, now the Supreme Court has ruled they illegally spent over €1 million promoting a yes vote in the referendum. They could have put that into hospital care.
Of course, yeah. I mean, to do that was an absolute nonsense. And they didn't give any money to the opposing side. So that's a very dangerous fascist road to go down. I mean, you have a government with taxpayers' money supporting what they want. Now, let's say I'm neither left nor right on the referendum. Let's just say I don't care what the referendum is about. It's very dangerous that you promote one side and don't give the same to the other.
I have another comment from a lady that says, my husband left me and went to the UK. He left me with the big mortgage. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. The banks won't help as his name is on the mortgage with mine. They won't look for him. I'm in arrears. I'm now blacklisted because of this. He got away with everything. I have a court date soon and have had 3 years to wait. It's so unfair.
It is, yeah, and we meet several people like that around the country, and it is unfair, and that's why I keep saying that there's not much justice, in the legal world. Legal world has very little to do with justice, because if this was just, the bank probably should be in the stand instead of this poor woman now maybe having to face court. And you see, the trouble with this, Jerry, too, is the problem is that these people do not have money now to pay barristers or solicitors. There's no free legal aid, okay? So here you have this nonsense again in this country that your taxpayers' money, right? So a guy, say, robs an old woman down the road here at knife point, takes her handbag, right? If he goes to court, he is afforded whatever legal services he wish, whatever defence he wishes, right? And you have this lady now who'll be going to High Court, and if she hasn't got 25 grand for a barrister, how do you think she's going to get on? And that's the crux.
It's not equitable at all when you put it like that. So we're listening to all the negatives.
Yeah, we know the problems.
We know the problem. I'm sure a lot of people, even though there's a lot of noise out there, but we have a good grasp at this stage what it's about. Yeah. So here you are, Ben Gilroy. You were sucked into this. You never intended taking part, and now you're the leader of a new political service, as you say it, called Direct Democracy Ireland, that's launching next Wednesday.
Yeah.
What's this about? What are you going to offer? Are you really going to offer hope and change?
Yeah, I really think it's the only way. Direct democracy, what that is it's basically you put the power back to the people rather than having a few people like Enda Kenny and others, Noonan and all these guys who sing from a hymn sheet to get your vote and then do what they want. So what it was in our first constitution, Articles 47 and 48.
That's the Irish Constitution.
The Irish Constitution in 1922, and they removed that illegally. And when they brought out the next constitution, they said that the government retained the right to referendum. Now, they didn't have it in the first place to retain. We had it, okay? And of course, Irish people fall for this trick of words now and again. Same with the fiscal treaty. When people used to Google the word fiscal, they realised it meant taxing. So they changed it to stability. So when Ben Gilroy was giving out about the fiscal treaty, you see, now Ben Gilroy is giving out about stability. He must be a lunatic. So it's this trick of words. So what direct democracy does is puts the power back to the people. In other words, we can call a referendum once we get a certain number of votes on anything we wish. And you can do it at local level, as well as county level, as well as national level. And I'm telling you now, Jerry, that on the night of the bailout, the phone call would have gone something like this, would say Cowan and Merkel. She would have said, I need you to bail out us German banks and blah, blah, blah. And he said, that's no problem. I'll do that. But the only thing is, in this country, we've direct democracy. And they'll call a referendum within 3 days, and they'll put an end to that. So now, Angela, you better come back with something better.
So that would have been the scenario.
Yes.
If you have in the Constitution something that was there, you said initially, and has since been removed. You're going a long way back to 1920s, like.
Well, our state is only about 90 years old, slightly
it's
older.
Young, yes,
it's one generation.
Yes,
I
true.
mean, and
true.
My father was telling me, he died a few years ago, but he was telling me that, he didn't have shoes till he was 16 years of age, and he used to be out throwing stones at the black and tans. And he said he couldn't believe that men are now crying because they get just a letter from the bank. And he said we need to start standing up for ourselves. The Constitution was put in by our forefathers because they were used to this eviction and this asset grab and land grab. And that was the first article they hit on. And look at us now today, 90 years old. Just over 90 years old, the state, and look at us again.
So the people would have moved, you're saying, back in 2008 and said, stop.
Yeah,
sorry. And our leader would have had to say that to Europe and that. We can't do this without the people having a say on it.
Absolutely.
So your formation meeting is next Wednesday, is it, in Buswells?
Yeah.
At what time?
At 2:00.
Are you extending an open invitation to people?
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is an open invitation to everybody in the country. Even if they can't make it, get onto our website and sign up. It's a recruitment drive we're going on. We've done all the hard work now for the last 2 years. We did a number of talks around the country explaining what we stand for, and it's basically putting the power back in the people, so you can't be against it. I mean, even if you're Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or whatever, if you want real power in this country back to the people, because once the people decide on the policy of the country, the people won't screw themselves. Like, so, that's what you got to remember. So that way then the blame lies fairly and squarely with themselves if something goes wrong.
So what's your aim? Are you aiming that by the next election that you're going to have candidates in the field?
Yes, absolutely. And we need to do it very quickly. I mean, the good ship Ireland is heading for the iceberg, and I'm telling you there's another ship called Direct Democracy in the water, and it's democratic, and we'll see where we go. And it doesn't really matter where it's going so long as, it's not heading for the iceberg.
Final question, just a quick one, for people listening today who find themselves in this bind, in this situation with any financial institution. Have you a couple of words of advice?
I have, yeah. Look, at all times, see if you can do a deal. I know the banks aren't very open to dealing at the minute, but, maybe they'll be persuaded, because my advice is, if you've nothing to lose, you get onto our website and we'll show you and help you in court, do up court papers, frustrate the courts, frustrate the banks, run up their legal costs higher than the money they're looking for, and you'll never have to pay it, because if you're going to lose, you're out on the streets. How are you going to pay it? And if you win, you don't have the legal costs anyway. So fight them at that. And once they know that's the plan, they won't be long sitting down then to do a meeting and do a deal with you.
That website is?